Good morning, everybody. We will be making a start in probably a minute or two. We're just going to allow for a couple of more people to join that we're anticipating, and then we will absolutely dive in. I guess as a bit of housekeeping, there will absolutely be time for questions at the end. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please do just pop them in the chat, and we'll be able to work our way through. We'll also be sharing the slides as a follow-up, so don't feel the need to scribble down like a maniac too much. We will circulate the slides in a prompt manner following the conclusion of this particular webinar. So as I said, we'll just wait one more minute and then I will look to kick things off. Couple more people just joining now, so we'll kick things off very, very shortly. Okie dokie, I think we are about there. So let's dive into this. So first and foremost, thank you and good morning, everybody. Really appreciate everyone giving up part of their day on this Thursday morning to hopefully join what we'll try and make to somewhat of an exciting topic around business premium and how we can best leverage some of these new features and exciting things that are coming from Microsoft and the Microsoft 365 suite as a whole. So I guess just to set the scene for today, purpose is really to try and talk through something that I think is both incredibly relevant and actually really exciting for almost every growing SME, if you like, that's out there. And there's a couple of key themes that we really want to focus on for the purpose of today, and that's how to stay secure, how to maximize that productivity, and how can we can be competitive without necessarily that enterprise level cost or complexity, which is what we've seen in historic years. It said we've got access to far more viable and far more impactful technology and features and products than we probably ever had before. And one of the things Microsoft has done incredibly well is actually package this and bundle this in a manner which is easy to consume and deliver for UK SMEs, which will ultimately deliver real good value and operational efficiency as organizations look to scale. So I really just want to dive in, I guess, by somewhat setting the scene. A bit of background in terms of what some people are facing at the moment, and certainly we know across the SME market and the clients that we look after, of which we're getting close to about 10,000 users that we support across the UK now. But many SMEs are juggling many different challenges, whether that be supporting hybrid and remote working, protecting themselves against increasingly sophisticated cyber threats, managing devices and data securely, or simply enabling teams to collaborate effectively. So what I really want to spend this morning on, and we should be able to get through this in about 20-25 minutes, is exploring how Microsoft 365, specifically Business Premium, can bring all of this together into almost a single consolidated platform, which has actually been specifically designed for SMEs. Certainly from the conversations that we have at the moment, we think there's a real underutilization of this. And clients typically fall into two camps. They either have the right license, but they aren't leveraging the appropriate feature set, or simply they're on the wrong license and are investing cost in buying products externally, which is both making this more complex to manage, increasing that security posture, and making it far more difficult to govern and scale moving forward. So what we're going to explore today is really how Business Premium within that Microsoft 365 ecosystem brings all of this together specifically to that platform designed for SMEs. And we're going to touch briefly on some of the challenges that they face, what actually Business Premium is, what that includes, how it can fundamentally strengthen that security posture, how it can simplify elements of that device management, and ultimately how it can improve productivity. We've got a couple of slides arranged for the latter parts of this particular webinar where we'll go through exactly how AI innovations through the likes of Microsoft Copilot is actually beginning to transform the way that our teams work. And actually, there's a really nice link to what we're doing with Business Premium around this. So really simply, my aim is by the end of the session, everyone on this particular call understands what Business Premium is, why it's our recommended license choice for UK SMEs, and how it's become that go-to platform for that modern, secure, forward-thinking SME. As I touched on, there'll definitely be time for questions at the end. So please do pop them in the chat as we go through the next few slides, and we'll work our way through those towards the end. So I guess let's start with the reality that I guess many SMEs are facing at the moment. And we know that economically, we're in an incredibly tough time. Inflation is high, national insurance, minimum wage. We've got tariffs that are getting imposed at a minute's notice. We've got economic turbulence, whether it be international wars or political debates that are impacting the various things that we buy with. So we know that the headwinds that UK SMEs facing is hard at the moment. It's a tough climate. And that's fundamentally changed over the last few years, notably with cyber threats that have increased massively. Small and medium businesses are increasingly targeted because attackers know that many organizations just don't have dedicated security teams. We were doing an event yesterday where we actually explored some of the trends and themes that we're seeing specifically amongst the UK SME market from a cyber security perspective. And actually, of all the successful cyber attacks that actually happened last year, 81 of those were with SME organizations. And we also know that almost 1 in 2, 44% of SMEs last year experienced a successful cyber attack. So the notion of it won't happen to me, it can't happen to me, we're too small, is simply statistically incorrect. And we actually see the threat vector increasing as the artificial intelligence to power some of those cybersecurity postures continues to grow. So we know cyber threats are increasing. Small and medium businesses are becoming increasingly targeted, and attackers know many organizations simply don't have the appropriate security posture or provisions in place to ensure that they have that peace of mind element. Cyber attacks will always be opportunistic, but we're seeing ransomware, phishing, credential threats, social engineering, supply chain attacks becoming far more prevalent. I mean, just look at the news over probably the last 6 to 12 months. There's been some really, really high profile cases of those. And they're in the news because they're high profile. What you don't hear or read about is actually the volume of which the smaller elements of UK organizations are actually being hit. So we know cyber attacks are increasing dramatically in recent years, and the impact is absolutely severe, whether it be operational disruption, financial loss, reputational damage, regulatory consequences. And actually, some organizations simply cannot recover from the financial impact or the operational impact that some of these have caused. And I guess the second side of things is we fundamentally changed the way we work. Going back sort of 5-6 years from the pandemic piece, everyone had to work from home almost at a moment's notice. Hybrid working is now very much the norm, almost flexible, fluid working in its entirety in some organizations. But your employees may be working in the office, they might be at home, they might be using personal devices, they might be on the move. And this creates a notable challenge for organizations that are looking to protect their data, their assets, and how their team works. And that question then poses, well, how do we keep data secure when work happens everywhere on any device at any time? And the third element that we want to sort of address from a challenge perspective is this need for increasingly complex tools to mitigate some of those risks. And SMEs are growing increasingly reliant on technology. Most are almost mission critical in terms of what they need from an IT perspective these days. And customers expect professionalism, responsiveness, and security almost by default. Their expectations of how we consume and deliver technology back to them is actually growing at a rate of knots as well. But we know that the SME market simply don't have large IT teams. They don't have large security buttocks or necessarily complex infrastructure. And what businesses need is that enterprise level capability, but delivered in a simple, manageable way. And this is exactly where we think Microsoft 365, specifically Business Premium, will be an incredible platform. And I'd stress the word platform, from which you can build, leverage, and implement some of these features to improve that security posture for not just your teams, but your organization as a whole. So I guess the next one for us is really just trying to touch on what we think Business Premium is. And that's what we want to delve into on this specific slide. So put simply, it's a license that combines productivity, collaboration, security, and device management into a single license costed as a per user per month. Importantly, I think it's really designed specifically for organizations up to 300 users. So it's perfect for most SMEs. The other thing to note is if you're above those 300 users, you can still leverage this license. Just above that 300 user count, you would have to leverage the E suite of licenses, E3 being the logical next step for those. So within this license itself, you get everything you're probably already expecting, and tools that your team are probably already relying on and using on a day-to-day basis. You get the full Office application, you get Outlook, you get Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams. But these tools are deeply integrated with the cloud. Each user within those receives a terabyte of OneDrive storage, SharePoint collaboration, access to up to 5 devices as well, which is actually quite a nice difference if you're implementing some of those BYOD policies. And employees can therefore work securely, whether they're using a laptop, a desktop, a phone, or simply a tablet. But that's the bit that everyone knows about Business Premium or 365 suites in general. What people often overlook or don't quite understand at the time is actually some of those advanced security and device management features that are included within that Business Premium suite. So we often speak to clients that, for example, are paying separately for antivirus, paying separately for email filtering, paying separately for an encryption service. Whatever those may be, the feature set is actually growing on a monthly basis within what Microsoft is actually allocating to that Business Premium suite. And once you start looking at those more complex, those more technological elements of that suite of features, that's where Business Premium really becomes the most obvious or prevalent choice for most UK SMEs. And that's exactly because what's included behind the scenes. So unlike, I guess, traditional productivity licenses, if you were to use Microsoft 365 in that way, Business Premium also includes out-the-box enterprise-grade security, whether that be Defender, Exchange Online protection for email filtering, or a couple of other really exciting elements. Identity protection, which we know is a key mitigating factor against some of the rise of phishing and social engineering. And device management, we said we've got far more remote teams working disparately on different devices and different time locations. How do we manage that? How do we control our data? How do we control the integrity, those revenue streams? How do we mitigate those risks that they potentially pose? And how do we do that in a simple, scalable manner that actually scales up and down in accordance with what our organization needs at the time, whether that be users, whether that be servers? Those numbers will flex. And my advice to most organizations is, how do you devise a platform that flexes both up and down with that demand, that can always keep up with actually what you need from a security perspective, from a collaboration perspective, and from a governance perspective? And that's where we're massive fans of the Business Premium license, because all of that becomes bundled into a single license, which organizations can leverage almost on a pick and choose basis of those features that you want to use. But the key thing is you are entitled to that feature set in its entirety. So I just want to delve into, I guess, a little bit some of those more exciting features that you get as part of that Business Premium license, with a real specific focus on SMEs around the security side. As I said, we did this event yesterday, and there were some really interesting responses that came out. Some of those statistics were including things like actually only 50% of organizations still rely on simply antivirus. I think only 17% of organizations have an incident response plan in place. And we know that from a reactionary perspective, spending typically increases post-breach. And our message that we're ultimately trying to convey is that prevention versus cure is always going to be the best bang for your buck, to use a terrible adage. Cost of recovery and cost of actually getting your data back and mitigating some of that operational impact is mid 5 to 6 figures for most UK SMEs. And that doesn't always factor in some of the hidden costs associated with that, the reputational damage, the notion of having to contact your suppliers to say their data has been compromised. There's so many hidden factors to this. And once again, we think organizations are missing a really massive trick in terms of leveraging some of the feature set built into that 365 license suite around Business Premium. And that's why our advice is ultimately to adopt that as standard. Now, that might not be perfect, but it needs managing and policing to actually get to the standard you need. But once again, that foundational level is probably as good, if not better, than what most of you have already. Most SMEs don't need or don't have a full-time security team. So security solutions, where possible, need to be automated, they need to be simple, they need to be intelligent, they need to be easy to buy, easy to consume, and easy to manage. And that should be the measure by which most organizations are trying to assess the products that they bring into their estate. So I guess first and foremost is Defender for Business, Microsoft Defender for Business. And this is very much sort of enterprise grade endpoint protection, designed specifically for SMEs. And I would stress that point. It continually monitors devices for threats and can actually automatically detect and respond to some of the suspicious activities. I'd say 10, 12 years ago, we wouldn't have recommended Microsoft Defender for Business as the recommended antivirus. But Microsoft have huge amounts of R&D, which they've really pushed into this. And certainly if you look at Gartner reports and any other key industry sort of headlights, Defender for Business now increasingly growing up that list in terms of one of the highly rated products that are out there. It protects natively against things like malware, ransomware, phishing attacks, and suspicious device activity. And more often than not, organizations will have one or two products outside of this stack that they're paying for separately. So there's a real value proposition here in terms of, you're probably paying separately for this. You're probably also paying for it as part of your Business Premium licenses. How do we consolidate that spend and actually improve that security posture for organizations like yourself? The second key component, which I think is worth touching on, is the Azure Active Directory Premium P1, so Microsoft's identity security platform. This ultimately allows, in partnership with things like Intune for device management, but allows organizations to implement things like conditional access policies. So you can only access X if you conform with Y. So, for example, you might require MFA when users sign in from outside the office or from unfamiliar devices, but you could figure that to be almost single sign-on for organizations, whether on trusted devices or in the office. It allows us to get really granular in terms of who can access what they can access once they're in, and how long they can necessarily access that for. This is a game changer in terms of how you can mitigate and manage that security posture for organizations, particularly with disparate teams or disparate devices. You can bring them in line with your baseline to have peace of mind that they're governed, policed, and managed appropriately in line with your own security practices. And this naturally dramatically reduces the risk of compromised accounts, which is one of the most common points of entry. I think there was a statistic from the event yesterday whereby actually 90% of attacks stem from email. And a lot of the feature set within Business Premium actually specifically looks to address this. It doesn't get to zero, but it fundamentally reduces that risk of those kind of things happening. And I think the final layer, which is actually one of the really exciting things, which very, very few organizations are leveraging at the moment, is data loss protection. And these tools ultimately allow businesses to prevent sensitive information from being accidentally shared or deliberately shared, and provide control over actually how data is used, governed, shared, and collaboratively worked on for organizations like yourselves. A couple of really good use cases for things like this is preventing sensitive financial information from leaving the organization, whether that be from a disgruntled employee or someone that has maliciously gained access to your systems. Protecting confidential documents, so only certain people with the right permissions can access the right things, and supporting compliance with data protection standards. And we know those standards are increasingly growing with the changes for things like Cyber Essentials, ISO 27001, and more complex frameworks around NIS2 and SOC 2 and various other things of that manner. So data loss protection is definitely a really nice value add. It probably doesn't replace anything that you're doing at the moment, but certainly most SMEs should be working towards achieving that. And I certainly think over the next 2-3 years, we'll see that become more of a standard across some of those accreditations and certifications that we've just touched on. The one bit I would stress about the data loss protection prevention piece is actually there is some foundational elements that need to be done first before you can really leverage some of those things. So, for example, your file data needs to be in SharePoint. It needs to be governed properly with sensitivity tags, with conditional access, with role-based access controls. And only once those bits are done can you actually configure things like data loss protection and purview appropriately. But nonetheless, you are entitled to this feature. There's not an additional license cost for this. It purely needs the environment to be managed appropriately in the first hand, which will then enable that particular feature set. And we've touched on some of the Intune pieces, and I think that's where we'll then lead into in terms of device and app management. And once again, all of these features are built into that Business Premium license. You get all of this natively out of the box on that Business Premium license, which you'll pay for. So with hybrid working, organizations now need to manage far more devices than before, and the complexity associated with that is naturally increasing. And this would include company devices, personal devices, phones, tablets, anything that a user uses to access corporate systems could be managed effectively by Intune. And Business Premium massively simplifies this by actually including that Intune suite as part of this license. So Intune will then allow organizations to effectively and appropriately remotely manage all of those devices in a single platform. So instead of a new user joins your organization and we have to copy the policies and copy the permissions from a previous user, actually we set this as a benchmark and a baseline. So we've got continual oversight and governance of actually what's happening in our environment. And how this plays through is it essentially enables IT teams or managed service providers like us for our customers to enforce standard security policies across all devices and all users. We can deploy applications automatically. So if there's a new thing to launch out, a way to do this in yesteryear would be either to build a script or to actually have to manually touch every devices. And where we've got increasingly disparate teams, that is an incredibly complex and time-consuming exercise for something that might have to be pushed out very, very quickly. We can do this seamlessly at the push of a button to every device without actually having to touch them. We can ensure every device actually meets those security standards prior to them having access to our system. So it's almost a blocker before it becomes a problem. One of the really exciting ones actually, which hopefully is never needed, but the ability to remote wipe lost or stolen devices. That risk of data loss is so great. And actually, a lot of data isn't actually going to be stored on devices. It's the nature of what we do with this hybrid working and things being cached with OneDrive and SharePoint. So the ability to actually control that should the worst happen, where that device gets compromised, lost, or stolen, is incredibly powerful. And the other bit, which I think is super, super exciting, is this concept of zero-touch deployment or zero-touch provisioning. And that comes from a feature we're called Windows Autopilot, which once again is built into that business premium stack. And this enables zero-touch device provisioning. So previously, new starter would join an organization, we'd have to get them into the office, we'd have to send them a laptop, we'd then have to go through various steps to get that built and configured for them ultimately to be able to use that as a workable device. In practice, this now means that ultimately a new employee can receive that laptop regardless of their location. It could be in a remote site, could be in their home location. They simply sign in and the device automatically configures itself with the company's policies, applications aligned with that security posture. So for growing organizations, this dramatically reduces that operational burden of device setup. It's quicker, it's more streamlined, it's more efficient, and the margin for error is so much less because it's not reliant on a human to do the right steps or copy the right permissions. So Intune and Autopilot are two incredibly powerful tools, which not only probably improve how you're governing and managing devices at the moment, but give you a platform from which you can ensure that baseline is adhered to across all devices, regardless of when they join that network. So security side of things and the device management and app side of things are both incredibly exciting and incredibly powerful features actually within that license itself. And I guess one of the other side of the licenses is actually how we boost productivity and collaboration part of this. This is probably the side that people are most familiar with if you've been using Microsoft 365 for some time, because SharePoint and things like OneDrive have been around for a good few years now and certainly have matured during that time. So security and management we know are absolutely essential, but technology ultimately must help teams work more effectively. And I would always use the analogy that actually IT should quietly underpin and perform aligned with the business strategy. And I'd stress the words quietly. It should be there to enable us. Technology by definition should make our lives easier, simpler, and allow us to be more efficient and productive when leveraging it in the right way. But technology actually has to help us do that. So Teams, Outlook, SharePoint, and OneDrive all work together. They work together as a connected ecosystem within that Microsoft platform. Teams can communicate, collaborate, run meetings, and share documents within that single platform. And one of the most transformative capabilities is that real-time collaboration. Gone are the days where you'd be working on a document with maybe 3 of your colleagues. You would email a copy to them, they would then email a copy, and before you know, there's 6 different versions of the same document out there. What we can now do is actually collaborate in real time. You can share that link, you can have multiple people working in that document simultaneously, regardless of the location. And once again, if their device is managed, you shouldn't necessarily be too concerned of their location, as long as that device is conforming with the standards that have already been set. And when they're working in their document, those changes appear in real time. They appear instantly. They eliminate that need to email different versions back and forth, or actually, I made a change last night, but I forgot to share that with you. Can we now consolidate those? Even doing the painful process of doing the side-by-side and comparing actually what had changed, that all of those problems just disappear almost overnight with effective use of that collaboration features. And beyond collaboration, Microsoft's cloud platform also enables businesses to actually automate processes and streamline some of those workflows. Once again, massively reducing some of that administrative overhead and efforts and allow teams to really focus on that higher value work. It's quite interesting that Microsoft actually positions this slightly differently. So rather than focus on return on investment, they have this concept of return on employee. How do we make the staff that are using these systems more effective, more efficient? How do we get more bang from a buck in terms of actually what they're doing on a daily basis? And some of these tools built into this 365 suite around productivity and collaboration absolutely drive some of this forward. And I'd certainly encourage most people to explore what this can do for you within your business. And then the next one is really just trying to bring this to life. What does this actually mean for us? What does this play through? How can we benefit from this? What are some of the real world benefits for me? So when these capabilities are ultimately kind, the value actually becomes pretty compelling and pretty clear, not just from a financial perspective, but a productivity and enablement perspective, and also your security posture. So within your 365 suite, to start with this particular one, you have something called Microsoft Secure Score. This ultimately benchmarks your organization for the policies that you have set up against all the other organizations that Microsoft looks after. And you can benchmark this against industries, you can benchmark this against organizations of similar size or much, much bigger. But once again, that is a valuable feature within that 365 stack. And where this comes from a financial perspective is that instead of purchasing all of those different solutions, whether it be for productivity, document sharing, antivirus, email filtering, device management, collaboration, Business Premium actually brings this all together into a single platform for a single user, which once again, depending on your commitment to Microsoft, can scale up and down accordingly. And the value of a license like that is anywhere from about £17 to £20, depending on, as I said, sort of the volume and the commitment model you're engaging with Microsoft on. And we know from our own research, both across our base and some of the industry reports, to actually deliver equivalent license types, you're probably looking at closer to £30 to £40 for all the various products. And we know that there's an immediate saving. The bit that often gets overlooked within that comparison is actually some of the management time to effectively configure some of those features. As I said, this isn't just a license you can just put in and then deliver the value. You need either the skills internally to manage it effectively and configure it effectively, or you need a partner to be able to manage it effectively and configure it effectively. But we know that there is absolutely a financial saving to be had, especially when you start to configure that full feature set of things like Windows Autopilot and data loss prevention and Purview. It becomes more and more compelling the more of that stack that you use. So for many SMEs, this means ultimately meaningful cost saved, not having to purchase separate systems, and ultimately the less technology or less platforms or less suppliers you have to manage in your ecosystem, the smaller that risk platform becomes, the smaller that risk landscape ultimately is. So we know that attacks are increasing. We can consolidate the systems of technology actually used to mitigate some of those risks proactively. And certainly with some of the exciting things around zero-touch deployment for Microsoft Autopilot and proper device management, we can fundamentally improve that user experience for faster setup, less downtime, regardless of the user's location, device, or complexity of actually what they're doing. So in short, it enables loosely SMEs to operate with the capability of much larger organizations at a price that's far more palatable and manageable and scalable for SMEs as a whole. And the one bit that we haven't touched on here is actually the next step. So a lot of what we've covered today is actually really what Business Premium can do for you today, how it's going to manage it, what's the value and features that you can get from that particular license site. But we would also describe Microsoft Business Premium as an enablement tool. And what we mean by that is actually with the correct management and configuration of some of those setups, device management, data integrity, and access is actually from a foundational element, you can then look to leverage some of the really exciting things around automation AI and specifically Microsoft Copilot. So I want to briefly touch on, I guess, what Copilot is, how it works, and how that integrates with some of the Business Premium suites. And ultimately, Microsoft 365 Copilot was almost designed specifically to augment your organization within that Microsoft 365 ecosystem. It integrates directly into your 365 applications. And the default or easiest place to start is it helps employees do simple things, whether it be draft emails, consolidate and analyze complex spreadsheets, create presentations, summarize meetings, record meetings and transcribe them, extract insights from documents. It's incredibly powerful. And once again, this concept of return on employee really focuses on some of those Copilot pieces. But what makes Copilot incredibly powerful is actually it works inside the tools employees already use every day. It runs on top of your organization's secure 365 data. And what that means is that it understands you, understands your documents, your meetings, your emails, and your workflows, all whilst respecting and adhering to your existing security and access policies. And what this really does is it opens the door to significant productivity improvements. But the only way you can be confident in terms of deploying something like Copilot is having the right foundational elements in place, which is best achieved through leveraging the feature set within Business Premium through device management, SharePoint permissions, and all the things we've already touched on. We're going to do a couple of further probably webinars and a couple of events specifically looking at Copilot, so I don't want to dwell on this too much, and I'm also conscious of time as well. So I won't talk too much more on the Copilot piece. But the one bit I do want to touch on is actually how this becomes even more commercially viable. So up until this point, I guess we've talked about two major but separate themes, and that's Business Premium and Copilot, with the view that Business Premium will somewhat enable more effective use of Copilot. But actually what Microsoft have done, I think very smartly as well, is they've actually offered a bundle license. So if you were to buy Business Premium and Copilot separately, you're probably looking anywhere between £40 and £45 per user per month. Commercially, they've actually incentivized this where you can now get it for about £32. There's an immediate financial saving if you combine the two, which somewhat recognizes the power of actually having both of these tools in place. And when you do combine both Business Premium and Copilot, you get three really powerful capabilities that are somewhat put together. From a security perspective, your identities, devices, and data are protected and can be governed in accordance with how you want them to be governed, and you can manage that or benchmark that against industry averages using things like SecureScore. From a productivity perspective, your teams can collaborate seamlessly, regardless of their device, their location, or their time of work, or arguably their role within your organization. As long as the data is structured in the correct way and you have the right working practices, that collaboration piece becomes far more seamless across those teams. And the third bit is where it becomes super, super exciting. And that's where you really build out this intelligence platform. You start to look at some of those trends and themes. You can start build some of those insights based on the data that you actually have access to. And AI ultimately will help every employee work faster and smarter. There needs to be a use case to be understood, but in its simplest form, it absolutely should be a productivity tool and an enablement product. And so for SMEs, this combination delivers something that's really, really powerful. Enterprise-grade capability without enterprise-grade complexity. Most SMEs actually have the opportunity to leverage this, which 4 or 5 years ago was neither viable or actually opportunistic for the SME market. It was too expensive. The foundational elements simply weren't there. And we were asking organizations to essentially cross a chasm. Whereby they now have access to things like Business Premium and Copilot, this is far more viable in terms of an opportunity for the SME market to leverage. And that's why so many of our customers and so many organizations, certainly across the UK and the SME market, are now looking at Business Premium as their preferred standard, but also as that foundational element to enable them to move on to some of those AI-powered workplaces, benefits that come from that. And as I said, commercially, there are absolutely incentives to do it. So if you already have a Business Premium license and you are toying with potentially getting a couple of Copilot licenses, absolutely explore this incentive. I think it's running till about June specifically, and as of which point those incentives might not be as favorable. Even if you just want a couple of licenses, I would say take advantage of it and start to see the value and power of what Copilot can deliver. And I guess final one for me, just to somewhat conclude, is 365 absolutely provides organizations with a platform that combines security, productivity, device management, and that ability to innovate and leverage some of those exciting things around AI and automation, all delivered in a single license that's designed specifically for growing SME businesses. So for organizations that are looking to modernize their workplace while staying secure and scalable, it's absolutely one of the most powerful tools that are available today. A couple of things we're doing for clients at the moment, and a couple of questions we typically get asked is, well, how do I know that we're using the right features? How do I make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck from our investment? Are there things that we're not doing that we could be doing? And certainly for our clients, we're probably doing two key things specifically around that Microsoft 365 stack. So we have a Microsoft 365 health check, which essentially will come in, assess your environment, look at your license type, your utilizations, understand what features you're using and what you're not using, and we'll then devise a quick wins and longer term roadmap as to how we get you from today to where you want to be in terms of maximizing that feature set. And the second side of things is actually once you've got some of those foundational elements in place, how do we then make sure that everything is at a good level from which we can then build to leverage some of the AI and automation pieces? So the other bit that we're helping our clients with is what we would call sort of an AI readiness assessment. If you were to release Copilot to your organization, can I be confident that only the right people can access the right things? The obvious example people give is payroll or sensitive information. If I was to load up Copilot and says, how much does Joe Bloggs earn? It's not going to give me that answer back. And the only way you do that is have the right structure and practices in place. So Copilot's an awesome product, but make sure that those foundational elements are in place. And I advise everyone on this call and anyone that's actually looking to further use 365 to explore the capabilities of Business Premium. And if you don't have the expertise internally to work with someone that can ultimately help you understand what that opportunity is and where those gaps exist. And I think that was everything that we had planned to cover off today. So if there are any questions, please do fire away and I'll do my best to answer them. Emphasis on do my best.
Hello. It's I've realised people can't see me. It's Kirsty from Novem. I've been monitoring the Q&A for you, Miles. So we've got a really good question from someone that says, we're rolling out Copilot and ChatGPT to our employees on paid business level subscriptions. Some users have shown intent on using free versions for speed, ease, and cost. From your point of view, how big of an issue to the business could free version usage cause?
Yeah, so actually it's a really good question. So functionality wise, you loosely get the same in terms of what you can use. The one key caveat of the free version is that it's not your data as such. So the free version does train the larger language model. So information and content you put in there could be used to train the Microsoft one. Once you go to any of the paid versions, that is specific to your organization. So it's a good thing to start using and get people using Copilot. But actually, I'd be very cautious about what information you're putting in there or uploading. So if you're giving people the opportunity to do that, make sure you've got a supporting AI policy that maps that out. But I would also stress that the free version of Copilot won't deliver the value that you probably want moving forward, or certainly not governed in the appropriate way from a data integrity and security perspective.
Brilliant, thank you. Someone's also asked, how do we get our security score? I think that's the secure score that you mentioned.
Yeah, so it should be in the admin center. You can either access yourself or you can ask your managed service provider or IT team to access. It's easily accessible. Anyone with the admin access can ultimately go to that. And even if you just Google, find my secure score in Microsoft 365, there'll be a couple of really simple steps to go through, but you will need admin access to view that.
Perfect. And then the last one, thanks for the webinar. You're welcome. Is our company data safe when using Copilot? We've heard some ChatGPT horror stories.
Yeah, there is a lot of horror stories out there. Someone touches on the first question that we had. So the free version, your data isn't secure. I said it will be training the larger language models as part of Copilot. As soon as you move to one of those paid versions, it is specific to your organization, and Microsoft commits to that data being secure and dedicated to yourselves. So yes, Copilot data is secure, but only once you're using some of the paid versions and not the free online version, essentially.
Perfect. Oh, I think we've got another one. Is it sometimes appropriate to have a mixture of standard and premium licenses according to user type?
Yes is the default answer. It's not as simple or as linear as a yes or no, because the key thing is what those users are doing. What you don't want to do is compromise the security just from a price point, because business premium is more expensive, but ultimately you can't govern all the other devices in the same way unless they're on that license. So I would encourage people to explore the frontline license, so the F1s to F2s and F3s. F3 is probably the most equivalent to business premium from a feature set, and it hits a good price point. So there will be use cases where some people might just need business standard, but from an organization, you need to recognize and acknowledge that you won't have that same feature set, and therefore you cannot govern, manage, or police some of those devices in the same way you can with business premium. If you are looking for a flex, I said I would explore the F3 license in combination with business premium, because that doesn't necessarily compromise the value or feature set as much.
Perfect, thank you. Unless anyone's got any more, there's no more questions come in, so someone might be typing really quickly, I'm not sure. But I think that's all of them for now.
Okie dokie. In which case, thank you ever so much for your time this morning. Been an absolute pleasure. We'll get the slides circulated, and if you have any questions for Novem or want to understand any of this more, please do reach out. We would welcome any conversations, and happy to help however we can.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.